autant la Flandre que la Wallonie et la France également. Je crois qu'il y a aussi quelques personnes qui viennent de Hollande. Donc c'est un événement qui nous tient bien sûr fort à cœur. Alors, question pratique. Vous avez donc les casques qui sont à votre disposition dans le fond de la salle et vous avez deux canaux. Le canot 1. À 11 heures. Donc la première partie va durer 90 minutes. Et donc, voilà. On vous présente aussi bien évidemment le docteur Vasquez, que vous avez déjà entendu à 2 reprises, en tout cas en Wallonie, et qui nous fait l'honneur de revenir une troisième fois pour ce séminaire sur l'immunité et les infections virales. Alors, vous savez que le contexte, évidemment, est tout à fait lié. On connaît une croissance importante des infections virales aujourd'hui, notamment qui parlerait du virus Ebola. Et donc, le docteur Vasquez a beaucoup travaillé sur le sujet, travaille encore beaucoup dessus. Il est l'auteur de nombreux livres, comme vous le savez. Et donc, nous avons la chance de l'entendre aujourd'hui pour une journée scientifique entière. Et voilà, je vais passer la parole à Bruno. Merci et très bon séminaire.
Goedemorgen, ik heet u van harte welkom nu in het Nederlands. Het is de eerste maand dat we, of ja, een van de eerste maanden dat we eigenlijk zowel vanuit Frankrijk, Nederland en België eigenlijk mensen kunnen samenbrengen. Als spreker hebben we vandaag Alice Vasquez. Hij heeft heel wat ervaring, heeft heel wat literatuur al gepubliceerd. Op Amazon.com kan je in feite enorm veel van zijn boeken terugvinden. En we spreken dan wel effectief over boeken tussen 700 en 900 bladzijden. Dus ik wil maar zeggen, als je van plan bent om zoiets aan te kopen, zal het zeker de moeite zijn. Vandaag zal ik het hebben over antivirale strategieën. We zitten met het Ebola-verhaal. Dat is een onderdeel van het verhaal, maar het gaat altijd over de immuniteit in het algemeen. Ook voor de vertaling moet ik zeggen dat het voor de Franstaling nummer 1 is, dat je kunt inklikken, en voor de Nederlandse talingen is het nummer 2. We hebben nog een kleine pauze vanaf 11 uur en dan kan je altijd nog ervaringen uitwisselen met collega's. Ik laat nu de heer Vasquez aan het woord. You have the word.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for making your way here in this dreary January day. So obviously the topic today is to discuss viral infections. And what I'd like to be able to do over the course of the day is help you look at virus infections in a different way. And we're going to approach that from a couple of different perspectives, not only medically and nutritionally, but also a little bit of commentary socially and politically as well. So we did make a slight change to the schedule. Instead of going for 60 minutes and then 90 minutes, we're going to go for 90 minutes and then 60 minutes. So my goal is to get through this first presentation, which is just context, and then get into at least the first half of the second presentation, which will actually be the therapeutic component. So having said that, and since everything's being translated, I try to keep my words as few as possible to make it easier on everyone, especially during the translation. That's obviously today's event, and appreciation to Energetica and Biotics Research for helping me get here. Everything I'm going to cover right now is in this new book that I just published last year called Antiviral Strategies and Immune Nutrition. This is available as a paper book, but it's also available as a digital book. The advantage to the digital book, of course, is that it's easier to carry around because you can have it in your computer or your phone. And also I can update that on a regular basis, which is more complicated with the paper book. So what you're getting right now is the most current version of this material, and I plan to update it in about 2 months. So if you have the digital version, you get the automatic update. Main purpose of this presentation, as I already said, is to look at treating viral infections from a different perspective. So my own perspective, for example, is pretty diverse, but I'm going to even go beyond the training that I had. So my training, as most of you know, is chiropractic, naturopathic medicine, and osteopathic medicine, which in the United States is the same as medical physicians. One of the things I noticed over the years is that throughout all of those programs, at no time whatsoever did we actually learn a really good strategy for treating viral infections. And I'll review that educational structure in just a moment. One of the things I want to emphasize in this first section is what all virus infections have in common. What we learn in medical school is how to distinguish one viral infection from another and how to treat them differently. And I think that that's an excellent approach if the goal is to be an excellent diagnostician and to then use antiviral drugs. And that is mostly the goal of medical education, diagnosis and drugs. But for us to be more successful as clinicians, I think that we have an advantage if we look at viral infections in terms of understanding the common themes and the common physiologic pathways that we can then treat effectively with nutrition. So as I say here, and this is a new slide that I just made this morning, if we appreciate what all virus infections have in common, then we can see common vulnerabilities that we can actually address very effectively. If all we do is focus on the differences in viral infections, then I think we'll remain therapeutically and clinically lost. And so I want to see if we can get past that. Also, in my opinion, everything exists within a social context, right? So even our understanding of viral infections has a social and political tone to it, we could say, right? So, and we've all been taught, and I'm saying that again from my own educational background, going to 3 different doctorate programs. We've all been taught to look at viral infections in a certain way. And the way that we've been taught to look at viral infections isn't without its political and social context. So I think we should appreciate some of that context. And we'll do that here. This is also a new slide, which I just made this morning. All it says basically is that even though we're going to talk about viral infections, my main purpose in today's presentation is to talk about new ways to treat those, not necessarily to review all of the drugs and all of the vaccines and all the virus infections. What I mostly want to focus on is how we can address these in different ways. And I think that's what I would hope you would expect as well. So we don't want to spend our time doing basic science that you can get off of any website or textbook. What we want to focus on is what's new and innovative here. So in 2014, I don't know to what extent the European community and press was inundated and overwhelmed with news on viral infections, but in the United States, they were certainly getting a lot of information on viral infections, to the point of actually trying to induce hysteria, it would seem. So, for example, this was a relatively new virus infection that ended up killing several young kids especially. This was in the news, and people were kind of starting to have panic over the severity and speed of these viral infections. Here's another article talking about this viral infection that targets kids. And here's another article talking about, of course, Ebola. And I don't know how much press Ebola got here in Europe. At this time of the year, last year in November, I was in South America, Colombia. But even then, the news everywhere I could see was just talking about Ebola and panic and more panic. And that's a really good example of mixing science with politics. Because as you'll see now, in just a moment, that information was distorted for some would argue political purposes. And obviously we're talking about Ebola. One of the things I noticed throughout all of these conversations about viral infections is that the consensus in the news and among the politicians and public health engineers was just a consensus of panic. Like there was no coordinated understanding of viral infections. It was just panic, emergency, military involvement. And I was kind of curious as to why that was. It seemed very inappropriate to me and very uncoordinated. So that was part of the reason why I revisited my own strategy here. So my own strategy has 4 components, which we'll look at here, and this will be the main focus of the day. The first part is an antiviral component. What can we do to actually destroy or target the virus itself? That's one of the main goals. That's also the goal of drug therapy. Second component is what I call anti-replication, or how can we block viral replication? Some drugs work at this level. Many nutrients work at this level. So you'll notice that the first 2 components are actually very consistent with the medical model. We're just going to use nutrients instead of drugs. Third component is what I call immunonutrition. I'll define that later, but it basically just means using nutrition to support the immune system so the immune system can do its job. That's not a novel concept in naturopathic medicine, but it's a relatively novel concept in medical training. And then cellular and systemic support. What can we do to actually support the entire body? What can we do to support cellular function so that it's not impaired and therefore doesn't have the opportunity through its impairment to contribute to viral disease? So 4 components. What I'd like to do before lunch is go through components, certainly 1 and 2, and hopefully we'll get to enter into component number 3 as well. So that's the outline of the day. We're going to talk about antiviral, how to target the virus, number 1, how to block replication, how to support the immune system, and then how to support the overall cellular health as well as systemic health. As I mentioned before, I've been through 3 doctorate programs, and in none of those programs did I actually see a cohesive strategy delivered to the students. And I think that that was a perfect strategy if our goal was to be confused and rely on drugs and vaccinations. But that's not the goal that I have. So what we learn in medical school, we have classes in microbiology. The take-home message from microbiology is that microbes cause disease, and if you can clean the community or wash your hands enough, then you won't get sick. So the subliminal message in microbiology class is sanitation. In pathology, I think we learn a lot of diseases caused by viruses, but we don't really learn how to treat those viral infections by themselves. I think that emphasizes our use of vaccinations. And then, of course, we have a class in pharmacology. We learn to use drugs. So at no point in time do we actually learn how to use nutrients to either block viruses or mitigate the adverse effects of those infections. I think that's a huge shortcoming. So what we're going to do right now in this section, I'm going to talk about patterns of viral illnesses, then I'm going to talk about vaccinations and drugs, and I'll try to get through that with some degree of speed. So here are a few things that I think everyone needs to appreciate so that we can realize the urgency of this information. And that is that all of you, all of us, we all have viral infections all the time, whether we know it or not. So, one way of reframing our perspective on viral infections is to not look at them as episodic events, but to look at them as ongoing daily events. So, even though I'm pretty healthy and pretty clean, I'm sure I've got some viral infections, and I know that all of you do too. And when we talk about viral infections, one of the ways that we can categorize viruses is to look at viruses in 2 categories. One is what we call exogenous viruses, or viruses that come from outside. Those are things like influenza, herpes, hepatitis virus, Ebola. Those are exogenous viruses. Those come from outside and infect the body. Another category of viral infection is what we call endogenous viruses. viruses that you already have encoded in your DNA. You're born with these viruses. Again, those are called endogenous retroviruses. Everybody has those as well. And I'll detail those more in just a moment. So, again, my point in bringing up those two items is to say that everyone has exogenous viruses and endogenous virus infections all the time. So, this is what I call the total viral load. Exogenous viruses, endogenous viruses, and another class of viruses called bacteriophages. Bacteriophages are viruses that only infect bacteria. And since you have trillions of bacteria in your gastrointestinal tract, a lot of those bacteria are infected by viruses, and then that virus activity, we could say, has some effect on systemic inflammation and systemic health. For example, and this is the best example, we see an elevated quantity of bacteriophages in patients who have inflammatory bowel disease, like ulcerative colitis, but especially Crohn's disease. So I think that data is relatively new. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on bacteriophages today, but I just want you to be aware that they exist, what they are, and the association with inflammatory bowel disease. So in this slide, what we're going to do is go through step by step the components of viral entry and viral replication. And this is more or less true for all viruses. It's mostly true. But the main point here is to begin to understand viruses in terms of basic physiology and basic components that we can then address with nutritional therapy. If we have a poor understanding of viral disease, then we're going to be more reliant, I think, on drugs and vaccinations. And that's a choice. People can use drugs and vaccinations all they want. I'm not going to resist that. But I do want to show you in this presentation that we do have some options. So the way that viruses cause disease is they attach to the cell. Different viruses have different affinity for different cell types. We'll talk about that in just a moment. So this is an exogenous virus. It's a virus from the outside. It has to attach to the cell and then enter into the cell. Then it has to enter into the nucleus. And then it has to get incorporated into the nucleus and the replicative machinery. Eventually that leads to protein production, and then that has to be assembled into a new virus, and then the virus gets released. So that's the basic pattern of how viruses cause their own replication. Viruses cannot replicate on their own, right? Bacteria can replicate on their own, but viruses cannot. Viruses can only replicate by embedding themselves within the cell and hijacking the machinery of the cell to cause its own replication. So that gives you a way to manage viral infections. One way to manage viral infections is to block this pathway, block this machinery, so that the virus can't produce itself by hijacking the cell. Here's another way of looking at the same information. We'll look at the same information in a different way here, and then I'll extend it just a bit. So here's a normal cell. Let's say that the virus attaches to the cell and then enters into the nucleus. The virus then has to integrate itself into the DNA or the replicative machinery of the human cell, right? So again, if you can control genetic expression by the use of nutrient therapy, then you can block the replication of this virus, or at least slow it down. If this virus successfully replicates at a high rate, it's going to, of course, cause an immune response. That's what we all know, and that's what we learn in school. But it's also going to affect the endoplasmic reticulum, which you can see here, and it's also going to affect the mitochondria, as you can see in this illustration as well. here again, you have some opportunities to support and protect the function of mitochondria, the endoplasmic reticulum, and the immune system as a way, as a strategy to alleviate the severity and duration of viral infection. So this is what I would call part 4 of my protocol, or actually part 3 right here and part 4, supporting immune nutrition and supporting nutritional protocols for endoplasmic reticulum and mitochondria. So, we've only been at this for 15 minutes, but even now we're already starting to see some new ways that we can approach these viral infections, certainly beyond what I learned in medical school. And I have a lot of respect for my medical school. It's very, very tough. It's one of the best medical schools in the U.S. But we only learned things within a medical model. We didn't go beyond that model. So our task right now is to go beyond that model. One thing that you may have learned in school, I only learned this in naturopathic school, was the concept of antigenic drift. So, and this is information from the U.S. government, the U.S. Institute of Health, I believe. So I just want to show you this concept of antigenic drift, and then we'll talk about how to address that from a nutritional standpoint. So this is very well accepted in microbiology, that viruses mutate over time, and when they mutate and they change their protein structure, they're able to evade the immune system. Does that make sense? Right? So if the virus is able to change its identity, so to speak, or change its molecular fingerprint, then it has a better chance of escaping the immune system. And that's called, in this context, antigenic drift. Well, this is a very important concept because, again, if you look at public health and if you look at microbiology data, they all talk about how antigenic drift is very important. It's just something that happens naturally, and it leads to the greater severity and persistence of these infections. Well, here's a new slide that I just made this morning, but you'll have all this information. We'll talk about it more later. One of the things you want to understand about antigenic drift, which ultimately leads to what I call immune escape, is that it's directly influenced by free radicals and antioxidant status within the host. So that's obviously something you can control with nutritional therapy. So the point being that if you give your patients antioxidants, you reduce their free radical burden. And if you reduce their free radical burden, you reduce the speed at which viruses undergo mutations. And if you reduce viral mutations, then you reduce antigenic drift, and the immune system is able to do a more efficient job of combating this viral infection. How's that sound? Sound reasonable? I'll show you the data on it. The data is very strong. And it's very strong in animal studies and in human studies. So, as I mentioned before, viruses have what we call tropism, or affinity for certain tissues, and the reasons I've given right here. It's either due to cellular receptors or proteins, different dependency on enzymes and transcription factors. That's just basic pathology. I won't spend a lot of time on that now. Let's just look at a few components of viral disease. Direct infection and triggering of tissue destruction. You see that, for example, in viral hepatitis and herpes encephalitis. Immunosuppression. Nearly all viral infections cause some level of immune suppression. So people, we might say, are more susceptible to viral infections if they're immune suppressed, but the viral infection itself causes immune suppression as well. Many viral infections also cause mucosal damage, and that can lead to secondary bacterial infections. A classic example of that is upper respiratory infections. A lot of times people will have a viral infection, it causes immune suppression, and it causes damage to the mucosal tissues. And then even after the viral infection gets cleared, patients then come in with a secondary viral or bacterial infection in the throat. Viruses